They dumped the snow on my driveway at 5:15 in the morning. I know the exact time because my security camera caught the whole thing. 3 HOA board members in reflective vests, led by none other than Greta Malloy, the queen of HOA tyranny herself, shoveling the entire street's worth of packed, crusty snow right onto my freshly cleared driveway. I'm Travis Newell, 46. I work nights running a logistics warehouse, which means I get home around 4, sleep by 5, and wake up around noon. Except not this morning. This morning, I was woken up by the unmistakable sound of a metal shovel scraping my concrete, followed by Greta's nasal voice barking orders like she was leading a military op. Make sure we pile it high. He didn't clear his sidewalk by midnight. That's a violation, she snapped. That was a lie. I cleared it right after I got home from work like always. The timestamp on the footage proves it. But Greta's had it out for me ever since I told her she had no legal authority to fine me for planting tomatoes in my backyard. I marched outside in my boots and flannel, still half asleep, and stared at the mountain of slush now blocking my garage. You've got to be kidding me, I muttered. Greta turned around with that fake smile she always uses when she's about to say something insane. Good morning, Mr. Newell. Unfortunately, your ongoing non-compliance forced us to act. The HOA regulations clearly state that snow must be removed by midnight. You failed to do so. Actually, I didn't, I said, pointing at the camera above my garage, and you just dumped 2 feet of snow on my cleared driveway. That's illegal. Then call the police, she said with a shrug, but I'd check your mailbox first. You've got a fine waiting. I did check. $75 for failure to maintain snow-free access. I laughed out loud. You're really trying to fine me for something you just did. She pivoted on her boot heel and walked off like she owned the whole street. Our HOA clubhouse sat at the end of our cul-de-sac, big, fancy, full of self-importance and bad decisions. I knew they had a board meeting scheduled there at 6. I also knew that the plow guy they usually hired had quit 2 days ago over unreasonable demands. Yeah, I asked him, which meant that this morning they had no one to clear the clubhouse parking lot. By noon, the snow on my driveway had started to crust over. I fired up my old red plow truck, the one I kept for emergencies and petty revenge. I checked the dash cam. Recording, I backed out slowly, turned left, and then lined up the plow with the wall of snow. One deep breath. One tight grip on the wheel, and then I hit the gas. The snow flew in a perfect arc as I pushed it down the street, past my neighbor's house, past Greta's gaudy lawn gnome collection, straight through the open gate of the HOA clubhouse lot, and then I kept going right through the parking lot. Right up to the clubhouse doors, and then boom, I dumped every last ounce of their snow right across the front entrance. 5 feet high, packed tight, I shut the truck off. You want to play games, I said, pulling out my phone. Let's play. The snow pile I left in front of the clubhouse doors held like concrete. I'd packed it tighter than a freezer full of bricks. Back home, I peeled off my gloves and queued up the dash cam footage, uploading it to a private folder titled Insurance Just in Case. I didn't share it yet. I had a feeling there'd be more to come. I was halfway through a microwaved burrito when I heard a series of loud knocks, sharp, rapid, and impatient. I opened the door to find Officer Darren Leland standing on my porch, boots wet and cap dusted with flurries. He looked less annoyed than I expected, almost amused. Travis, he said, brushing snow off his sleeves, we had a call from the HOA, said you obstructed public access to their property. Public access, I raised an eyebrow. I thought it was private property. That's what they told me last year when I tried to use the clubhouse gym. He shifted his weight, clearly trying not to laugh. You have video of them dumping snow on your driveway. Want to see it? I stepped aside and led him to my living room where I pulled up the footage. He watched in silence first the time-stamped clip of me clearing my driveway before sunrise, then the 3 board members shoveling snow onto it hours later. When the video ended, he nodded. Yeah, that's criminal mischief. At minimum, you want to press charges. I crossed my arms. If I don't, what's stopping them from doing it again? He took out a notepad. All right, I'll file the report, but just a heads up, anything you do in return, even symbolic, can complicate things. The snow pile at the clubhouse, that might be seen as retaliation. I didn't argue. I'd made my point. But if this was going to court, I needed more than a video. I needed a pattern. The next morning, I went door to door, not with complaints, just questions. I asked neighbors if they'd ever been fined for things that didn't make sense, if they'd ever had property tampered with. If any of them had footage. What I got was a floodgate. One neighbor, Mrs. Zara across the street, showed me a letter she'd received last fall. Greta had fined her for excessive lawn clutter because her grandkids had left sidewalk chalk drawings on her front path for one afternoon. Another guy, Jorge, who lived 2 blocks over, said he'd been charged twice for unauthorized fencing, even though his wooden gate matched the HOA-approved design to the inch. And then there was the kicker, a retired postal worker named Marvin, who'd installed a ramp after his knee surgery and was fined for it, obstructing visual flow. "What does that even mean?" Marvin asked, shaking his head. "They said it disrupted the aesthetic harmony. I paid for that ramp myself, didn't ask them for a dime." I asked if he had the letter. He did. I took photos. In 2 days, I gathered over 20 separate complaints, some minor, some outrageous. But none as damning as the one from Valerie and Ken Tran, a couple who just moved in 6 months ago. "I didn't know they could put a lien on your house over a missing hedge," Ken said, flipping through a folder of paperwork. "They can't," I said. "Not without due process. They said they'd already voted on it in their executive session," Valerie added, "and that if we didn't pay the landscaping fee plus the fine, they'd escalate it to legal." I asked if they'd received a formal notice or any kind of hearing. They hadn't. That was it. That was the opening I needed. Under Colorado State Law Section 38, Article 33.3, HOAs are required to provide homeowners with notice and an opportunity to be heard before imposing fines or initiating enforcement actions. I'd brushed up on it last year after the tomato garden nonsense. I spent the next 3 nights compiling everything: videos, letters, email chains, a spreadsheet of questionable fines, all cross-referenced with HOA meeting minutes. I found at least 8 fines issued without any recorded discussion or vote. I highlighted them in red. I wasn't going to the HOA board. That was pointless. I went to the county clerk's office and filed a formal complaint with the Department of Regulatory Agencies. Then I contacted a friend of mine, Carly Mendez, a municipal attorney I knew from my college days. She owed me one for helping her brother land a shipping job last year. She didn't just look at the file, I could hear her jaw drop through the phone. "They're not just overreaching," she said. "They're breaking multiple statutes. You've got due process violations, misuse of fines, and potential fraud if they put that lien on the trans house without legal backing. Think it's enough for a civil suit? More than that," she said. "This looks like grounds for a class action." By Friday night, I had 27 homeowners signed on. Some were hesitant at first, but when I showed them the documents highlighted, sourced, timestamped, they didn't hesitate. We filed the suit Monday morning. The response from the HOA was immediate. Greta knocked on my door herself this time, flanked by 2 of her board cronies, both of them trying to stare me down like extras in a bad courtroom drama. "You've created a hostile situation in this neighborhood," she said. "There are proper channels for this." "Funny," I said, holding up a manila folder. "I thought those were the channels you ignored. You're going to regret this." I stepped onto the porch and folded my arms. "No. You're going to regret dumping snow on the wrong driveway." The next day, local news showed up. Apparently, someone had tipped off Channel 7 Investigates. I didn't ask who. The reporter, a wiry guy named Devin with a sharp blue tie, interviewed half the block. He caught footage of Greta storming out of the clubhouse mid-interview, refusing to answer questions. That night, my inbox lit up. 10 more residents emailed me with stories. One even had video of Greta directing a landscaper to remove a neighbor's bird bath because it wasn't on the approved Daker list. By the end of the week, Carly had filed an injunction to freeze all pending HOA fines until the case went to court. Greta sent out a mass email claiming we were undermining neighborhood unity. Nobody replied. Instead, someone added her lawn gnomes to the local buy-sell trade group with the caption, "Free to a good home, taste optional. It wasn't just about the snow anymore, it was about power, abuse of it. And what happens when people stop looking the other way, and we weren't finished? Not by a long shot. The hearing date was set for 3 weeks out, but things unraveled faster than even I expected. Once the injunction froze all fines, the HOA's power started to wobble. The clubhouse, once the symbol of their control, sat buried and unused. The snow I had pushed there had long since melted, but no one had bothered to clear the entrance, probably because no one wanted to be seen cleaning up the consequences of their own stunt. Greta had gone quiet, but shadows were still moving behind the scenes. The Tran family called me one evening with something urgent. Ken had received a certified letter from a title company apparently. Someone had quietly tried to initiate a foreclosure proceeding based on the fraudulent lien Greta had slapped on their house. That was no longer just improper. That was criminal. Carly reviewed the documents they handed over. There was a forged signature on one of the authorization forms. Not Ken's, not Valerie's. Someone had impersonated them to validate the lien. Carly's voice was tight when she spoke. This is felony-level fraud, wire fraud, forgery, attempted theft. We're not just dealing with fines and overreach anymore. I forwarded everything to Officer Leland, who had already been lightly monitoring the situation. He brought in a detective from the Financial Crimes Unit the next day. Within 48 hours, the county prosecutor's office issued subpoenas for HOA financial records, board meeting recordings, and all lien documentation for the past 2 years. The HOA's treasurer, a guy named Dennis who looked like he hadn't been outside in a decade, cracked fast. According to someone who worked at the clerk's office and had seen the subpoenas land, Dennis came in shaking and requested immunity in exchange for full cooperation. Apparently, he had been pressured into signing off on several irregular emergency authorizations. Greta had drafted, most of which had no board approval at all. The snow dump. That turned out to be the tip of the iceberg. Dennis handed over a thumb drive with internal emails. One in particular stood out. It was from Greta to the other 2 senior board members. The subject line, enforcement leverage. The body of the email outlined a plan to create visible infractions on properties that resisted board authority. She even referenced me directly, saying, "If Newell continues to ignore HOA protocols, we'll escalate. No more warnings. Time to establish consequences." She'd used the word consequences like she was running a private tribunal. The detective showed up at my place the next day to take a formal statement. This time he wasn't alone. 2 plainclothes officers trailed him, one of them holding a sealed warrant. They were heading to the HOA clubhouse next. "Just one question," I said as I handed over the footage from my security camera and the folder of neighborhood testimonies. "Are you arresting her?" "We're not there yet," the detective replied. "But if this goes the way I think it will, she'll be in cuffs before next week." The next morning, the clubhouse was surrounded by county vehicles. Not just squad cars, there were IT specialists hauling out computer towers, property auditors flipping through file boxes, and a locksmith drilling open Greta's office door. Word spread fast. Neighbors came out in bathrobes and slippers, watching from their porches like it was a parade. At exactly 10:15, Greta was escorted out of the building wearing a fleece vest and trying very hard not to look directly at any of the cameras. She wasn't cuffed, not yet. But the look on her face wasn't one of confidence. It was pure calculation, like she was already gaming out her next move. Later that afternoon, one of the HOA board members, the youngest, a guy in his 30s named Ray who'd never really said much, showed up at my door, holding a manila envelope. "I didn't know about any of the forged documents," he said, almost before I opened the door fully. "She kept everything siloed. I didn't even know about the Tran lien until the subpoenas. So why are you here?" He handed me the envelope. Inside were handwritten notes, meeting agendas, and a spreadsheet titled Compliance Forecast. It listed every household in the neighborhood, color-coded with labels like resistant, vulnerable, and cooperative. "You were marked red," he said. "So were the Trans. Marvin was orange." "I think that's why she went after his ramp." My hands tightened around the envelope. Did you know she was planning to target me with the snow stunt? He shook his head. No, but I should have seen it coming. She talked about examples all the time, how fear was more effective than consensus. I thought it was just rhetoric. I didn't thank him. I didn't need to. He left without asking for anything. Within 72 hours, the county issued a formal statement. The HOA board was under investigation for financial misconduct, fraudulent lien filings, and abuse of enforcement authority. Greta had been formally charged with criminal misrepresentation and attempted real estate fraud. Her bail was set at $50,000. The news coverage exploded. Local networks ran segments with headlines like HOA tyrant targets homeowners and neighborhood revolts against rogue board. Interviews with residents, many of whom had never spoken out before, aired nightly. One woman described how Greta had fined her for unsanctioned daycare after she hung a pride flag during June. Another man described being threatened with legal action over a tree he'd planted in memory of his late wife. The judge overseeing the civil suit fast-tracked our case. Carly filed a motion to dissolve the entire HOA, citing systemic corruption and irreparable breach of fiduciary duty. The judge approved a temporary freeze on all HOA operations and appointed a court liaison to oversee neighborhood governance until a formal hearing. With their authority suspended, the 3 remaining board members resigned within days. Dennis disappeared from the neighborhood, entirely moved in with a cousin, according to gossip. Greta's house went dark. Her car was gone, mailbox taped shut. No one saw her after the arraignment. But the best part, the lien on the Tran home was not only voided, but the title company that had been misled into processing it issued them a formal apology along with a check to cover their legal fees. With the HOA crippled, the neighborhood came alive. Kids chalked the sidewalks with cartoons and hopscotch grids. Valerie planted a row of sunflowers along her fence. Marvin added solar lights to his ramp. I built a raised garden bed tomatoes, of course, and nobody said a word about it. And me. I replaced the old dash cam in my plow truck with a newer model. Just in case history tried to repeat itself, one evening, as I was out watering the garden, Officer Leland pulled up in his cruiser. He stepped out, leaned against the hood, and looked around at the block. Quiet this week, he said. Yeah, I replied. Feels weird. He smiled faintly. Not weird, just peaceful. That's what it's supposed to be. He paused, then added, Oh, and the prosecutor's office may ask you to testify. You all right with that? Absolutely, I said. I've got all the receipts. As he drove off, I looked down at the tomato plants sprouting in the corner of the bed. Resilient, persistent, growing right out of the dirt they tried to bury me in. For the first time in a long while, the neighborhood felt like it belonged to the people who lived in it, not the ones trying to control it from behind a desk. And that was worth every ounce of snow I ever pushed. 2 weeks before the court date, I was sitting on the back porch with a mug of black coffee and a legal pad when Carly called. The line buzzed faintly, like her voice was pushing through a storm. They've been cooking the books, she said. It's not just the liens or the fines, it's the dues. A chunk of everyone's annual payments never made it into the HOA escrow account. I set the mug down and clicked my pen. How big a chunk, she exhaled. Close to $60,000, spread across 4 years. The forensic auditor thinks it was siphoned into a separate LLC Greta registered under a different name, GEM Community Services. She listed it as a third-party contractor for aesthetic improvements. She was paying herself, through a shell company, Carly said. And with no real work being done. The only thing GEM ever billed for was a fountain that never got built and a landscaping project the county can't find permits for. A cold knot formed in my gut. We'd been chasing her over fines and forged documents, but this was something else. This was theft calculated, systemic theft disguised as neighborhood maintenance. Later that day, I made a trip to the county records office. I pulled every vendor permit and contractor filing tied to our HOA for the last 5 years. GEM Community Services never applied for any of them. No inspections, no approvals, no receipts, just invoices signed by Greta. That evening, I met Carly in person at her office downtown. She had a folder open on her desk with a printed email thread between Greta and a man named Leon Weissgem's supposed project manager. But Leon didn't exist. The email domain traced back to a private server hosted under Greta's maiden name. "We're bringing in the district attorney," Carly said. "This isn't civil anymore. It's fraud, embezzlement, and potentially tax evasion." By the next morning, the DA's office had opened a formal criminal investigation. A separate task force was assigned to track the flow of HOA funds. Carly filed an emergency motion to freeze all HOA bank accounts and seize any assets held by GEM Community Services. The fallout was immediate. A court-appointed investigator arrived to audit the remaining board members, who had scattered like marbles on tile. Ray, the quiet one who had turned over the compliance forecast, came forward voluntarily and offered to testify. He handed over a separate notebook, a ledger Greta had kept in her office drawer, tracking payments from the HOA account to GEM every quarter. Each entry was marked with a 3-letter code. CSF, Carly narrowed her eyes. Community Service Fund, Ray shook his head. No, that's what she told us at first, but then she slipped up at a meeting. Said it stood for control, stability, and flow. She had this whole theory about managing behavior by tightening budgets and using compliance fees to discipline the neighborhood. I stared at the page. She was financing control with stolen dues. Warrants were issued for Greta's digital records. The DA's office seized her home computer, 2 external hard drives, and a tablet she had used for board meetings. They also subpoenaed her bank records. What they found buried her. Over the course of 3 years, Greta had funneled just under $74,000 into GEM's account, then moved the money into a Roth IRA under her sister's name. The sister lived out of state and hadn't spoken to Greta in years. When contacted, she was shocked and agreed to cooperate. With the paper trail complete, the DA filed formal charges. 6 felonies: wire fraud, embezzlement, forgery, misuse of fiduciary power, financial coercion, and attempted fraudulent foreclosure. The judge issued an arrest warrant. Greta was picked up at a motel 2 counties over, where she had checked in under the name Lynn Carter. She had prepaid for 2 weeks and listed her occupation as consultant. The mugshot hit the news the following morning. Her hair was unkempt, roots showing through a cheap dye job, and her expression was flat. No makeup, no vest, just a gray county-issued sweatshirt and the unmistakable look of someone who had finally run out of moves. The neighborhood held a meeting that weekend, not in the clubhouse, which was still under state review, but on my front lawn. Folding chairs popped open. A long table was set up with coffee, cookies, and a big stack of printed updates from Carly. We covered everything: the charges, the funds recovered, and the proposal to dissolve the HOA entirely with court approval. Carly explained the process in clear, firm language. The court would appoint a temporary residential council to handle the transition, and after a vote, the HOA could be legally disbanded. Every single household voted in favor. A week later, the judge signed the dissolution order. The HOA was officially terminated. Its accounts were closed, assets liquidated, and all remaining funds returned to the residents on a prorated basis. Each homeowner received a check. Mine was for a little over $900, but it wasn't about the money. It was about the weight that lifted. The feeling of walking outside and not wondering if your flag or your lawn or your driveway was going to trigger a fine. It was about Marvin repainting his ramp in bright blue, because he could. It was about Valerie planting a second row of sunflowers and Jorge building a new fence, one that curved, imperfectly but beautifully. One afternoon, I drove past the old clubhouse. The sign had been removed. The front doors were padlocked, and a notice from the county hung in the window. Pending reclassification, property under review. I rolled down the window and looked at the building. It didn't feel like a fortress anymore, just a hollow shell where bad decisions had festered too long. A few days later, Officer Leland dropped by with an envelope. Inside was a letter from the DA's office. "Thought you'd want to see that," he said. The letter stated that, due to the weight of evidence and witness testimony, Greta had accepted a plea deal. 5 years in state prison without parole, plus full restitution to the HOA residents. Her Roth IRA had been liquidated, and the funds were being redistributed as victim compensation. At the bottom of the letter, a handwritten note had been added. Special thanks to Mr. Newell, whose documentation and leadership were instrumental. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer with the legal pad I'd used to track everything. Then I walked outside, past the tomato beds, down the street lined with chalk art and blooming planters, and waved to Mrs. Zara, who was helping her grandkids set up a lemonade stand. The neighborhood had changed. Not because someone came in and fixed it for us, but because we stood up when it counted, because we didn't let power go unchecked, because we pushed back. As I walked up the drive, I noticed something new. Someone had stuck a small sign in my garden, painted by hand, uneven but bold. It read, "Welcome to Snowplow Lane, home of the HOA takedown." I didn't know who made it, but I left it there.